Hello, James Trim here. I want to talk to you today about the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And this particular video will not go into the scriptures or try and build a case from the scriptures about the 10 tribes. We're going to do that in future videos. But before we do that, I wanted to do a video that firmly establishes that the ideas that we are going to be talking about are Jewish. This is not a rehashing of Anglo-Israelism or so-called two-house theology. Back in 1998, this book, which is flipped in your video, Who is Israel and Why You Need to Know by Batya Wooten, created a big burst of energy in Messianic and Hebrew roots circles and created a huge movement called the Two House Movement that was kind of like a flash in the pan. It had a whole lot of energy, and they had a number of conferences for 5 or 6 years, and then everything started to die down very quickly, and the idea, if you will, got old. Um, so the excitement level dropped. There was a huge conflict between this two house movement and established Messianic Judaism for a number of reasons, but that's not the point of this video. Um, because this movement, this two house movement, in fact, this book was published a year later by Eddie Chumney. And you can see plainly, and in the book, it plainly identifies Christianity as Ephraim and apparently rabbinic Judaism as the house of Judah. And that's problematic for a number of reasons. It would be fair, however, to say that Christianity, where Isaiah talks about the two houses stumbling in Isaiah 7:14 or 8:14, um, the uh, uh, the two houses stumbling might well be Christianity might be Ephraim stumbling, and rabbinic Judaism might be Judah stumbling. But the authentic representation of Judah, of the house of Judah, is Nazarene Judaism, not rabbinic Judaism. And frankly, Christianity is a better case can be made that Christianity is prophetic Babylon, not Ephraim. Um, Ephraim is called out of Babylon, and that's a whole nother video we will have in the future. But when this started happening, I had already been teaching the restoration of Nazarene Judaism for 10 years before this book came out, at least. So I started getting at, and I'd already been teaching what I call United Israel theology. So when this happened, a lot of people tried to um, uh, label me as a two-houser, or that what I was teaching was two-house theology. And I will show you as we continue along that it's not. What I'm teaching and what I've been teaching all along is a Jewish theology that has existed in Judaism and does exist in Judaism. And it's not Anglo-Israelism or two-house theology. Um, but it is quite Jewish. And so let's go on to our first handout. Will the lost 10 tribes return? And there will be a link to the handouts at the bottom, at the description of this video. Also, before we get going too far, I need to ask you to please consider supporting this work. A lot of time goes into the research of these videos, and the video maybe takes an hour to make, but it takes several hours of research and putting the handouts together and to do this kind of quality teaching for you. And frankly, you can't get a lot of this quality teaching that we're doing in these video series anywhere else. So please consider donating. There's a link where you can donate in the description to this video, or you can donate by PayPal to donations at wnae.org. We definitely need your help. Um, so we depend entirely on donations from you to make this work happen. All right, let's get on to the handout titled Will the Lost 10 Tribes Return? And we begin here with a passage of Mishnah, Sanhedrin 10:3. Now, most of you are not familiar with the Mishnah on a very high level, so let me tell you that this portion of Mishnah in context has to do with a portion that's discussing who can serve as a witness. And in questioning who can serve as a witness, this portion of Mishnah opens by, well, it didn't open, but it says, um, all Israel has a part in the world to come. Very similar to Paul's statement, all Israel shall be saved. It says, all Israel has a part in the world to come. And then it says, um, these have no part in the world to come. And it begins to lay out different groups that do not have a part in the world to come, and therefore are not to be counted as part of Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. Now, in that context, Mishnah Sanhedrin 10:3 says, the 10 tribes are not destined to return, since it is said, and he shall cast them into another land as on this day, Deuteronomy 29:28. Just as the day passes and does not return, they have gone their way and will not return, the words of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer says, just as this day is dark and then grows light, so the 10 tribes for whom it is now dark, thus in the future is destined to grow light for them. So a little background info. Rabbi Akiva is the rabbi that endorsed uh, uh, Ben, uh, ben Bar Kokhba as the Messiah, and then renounced that later when Bar Kokhba turned out not to be a very good Messiah after all. So it was kind of a disgrace for him. By contrast, Rabbi Eliezer was at one time convicted and ostracized for allegedly being a Nazarene. So that kind of also sets up this sort of as a conflict between the Nazarene point of view and Akiva's point of view. The Gemara to this passage of Mishnah says, our rabbis taught, the 10 tribes have no portion in the world to come. As it says, and the Lord rooted them out of their land in anger and in wrath and in great indignation. And the Lord rooted them out of their land refers to this world and cast them into another land to the world to come. This is Rabbi Akiva's view. So it's elaborating on Rabbi Akiva's view above. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda of the Kifar of Akko said on Rabbi Shimon's authority, if their deeds are as this day's, they will not return. Otherwise they shall. Rabbi said, this is Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi said, they will enter the future world as it is said, and it shall come to pass in that day the great trumpet shall be blown, and they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and the outcasts of the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Lord in the holy mount of Jerusalem. Isaiah 27:13, and he's connecting Isaiah 27:13 to Deuteronomy 29:28 based on this phrase in that day. So, and the world to come refers to the Messianic kingdom. So this is kind of a conflict between Akiva and Eliezer as to whether the lost 10 tribes would return. And in the Gemara, we see that Rabbi Yehuda, who was Nasi of the Sanhedrin, the leader, president, if you will, ruled in favor of Rabbi Eliezer's view that the 10 tribes would in fact return and have a part in the world to come. And like I said, it's helpful to know in reading Talmud and the Midrash Rabbah and whatnot that when you read the rabbi by itself, that it's always talking about Rabbi Yehuda. All right, our next handout, Lost and Found. And we have another passage of Talmud, and it's Yevamot 16b, which means page 16, column B. Rabbi Yehuda said, in the name of Rabbi Asi, if at the present time a heathen betroths a daughter of Israel, note must be taken of such betrothal, since it may be that he's of the 10 tribes. So here, Rabbi Yehuda expresses the idea that the lost 10 tribes are embedded among the Gentiles, and we don't know who they are. And that if a daughter of Israel marries an alleged Gentile, maybe they're a Gentile, maybe they're a member of the lost 10 tribes. We don't know. So let's keep track and watch that, the genealogical line, because it may turn out that they're Israelites. Midrash Rabbah also speaks of the future reunion of the two houses of Israel in Midrash Rabbah to Genesis Rabbah, um, 98:2. And he said, "Gather yourselves together," and that's in Hebrew, he asifu, assemble yourselves and hear. This is 49:1 in Genesis. Gather yourselves together from the land of Egypt and assemble yourselves into Ramses. And the Midrash Rabbah interprets, gather yourselves together from the exile of the 10 tribes and assemble yourselves to the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, which are the house of Judah. He thus commanded them to show honor to the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Rabbi Aha interpreted the word he asifu, purify yourselves, as in the verse that they gathered themselves together and they purified themselves. The rabbis say he warned them against discussion, bidding them, be you all one assembly. Thus it says, and you, son of man, take you one stick and write upon it for Judah, and the other stick, the other for the house of Israel, for the children of Israel, his companions. Write on one hand, then they may prepare themselves the redemption for what follows this. I will make them one nation in the land. So this is referencing the two sticks prophecy of Ezekiel 37, with which I'm sure we're all very familiar. Let's move to the next handout, which is titled "The Gentiles Blessed." And again, we have Midrash Rabbah, and we have here the Song of Songs Rabbah 4:2. It says, "They shall come trembling as a bird out of Egypt." This refers to the generation of the wilderness, and as a dove out of the land of Assyria. Hosea 11. Um, this refers to the 10 tribes, and of the birth of them it says, "And I will make them to dwell in their houses, says the Lord." Rabbi says, that's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, when a certain kind of dove is given food, the other doves smell it and gather to her coat. So, when the elder sits and discourses, many strangers become proselytes at such a time. So, for instance, Jethro heard the news and came. Rabbah heard and came. And so through Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, many strangers became proselytes at that time. What is the reason? Because when he sees his children sanctify my name, then as it goes on, they also that err in spirit shall come to understanding. Isaiah 29, 23, and 24. So this is saying that when the restoration of the house of Israel and the reunion takes place, um, and the many in the house of Israel begin to recognize who they are and to study Torah and seek out Torah and return to Judah, to the house of Judah. Uh, it's kind of like pulling grass or pulling weeds up. Um, you the roots pull a bunch of the dirt with them, which I'm not saying the Gentiles are dirt. I'm making an analogy here that they end up dragging a lot of Gentiles along. So that there's this blessing of the nations that has taken place um, by virtue of the scattering of Israel amongst the Gentiles and the loss of their identity, such that when they rediscover their identity and turn to Torah, a lot of Gentiles see this and also turn to Torah. And so, and we see that happening, I believe, today. Um, so, what became of the lost 10 tribes? That's our next handout. And Genesis Rabbah 73:6 says, and she called his name Joseph, saying, the Lord add to me another son, 30:24. Genesis 30:24. Another in respect of exile. Rabbi Judah ben Rabbi Nasi said, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin were not exiled to the same place as were the other 10 tribes. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin, obviously being the house of Judah, and the other 10 tribes being the house of Israel. The 10 tribes were exiled beyond the river Sambachon, whereas the tribes of Judah and Benjamin were dispersed in all countries. Another son, commenting on the words another son, in respect of dissension, Rabbi Pinchas said, through Rachel's prayer, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin did not revolt against the Davidic dynasty, together with the remaining 10 tribes. And the word another here denotes the behavior of others. Now, this is telling us that the 10 tribes crossed over a river known as the Sambachan, and there is a good deal of debate over what river that actually is. Genesis Rabbah 11:5 says the river Sabachan carries stones the whole week, but allows them to rest on the Sabbath. And this is similar to a statement in the Talmud, in Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin 65b, let the river Sabbathanian prove the seventh day as the Sabbath, because of this legend that that it carries stones along, its current carries stones along, but not on the Sabbath. Okay, so this brings us to our next handout, which is about my old friend Yochanan ben David, or John Hulley. So back in 1987, there was an article published in an Orthodox Jewish journal, a Chabad journal, titled, Did Any of the Lost Tribes Go North? By Yochanan ben David, or John Hulley. This journal was called Ba'or HaTorah, in the light of Torah. The object of this paper was to identify the Sabachon, and thus determine the location of the 10 lost tribes. The article concluded that the Sabachon was in fact the Bosphorus Straits between the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. Hulley showed that the straits were anciently referred to as a river, and that due to current fluctuations between the two seas, the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, the Bosphorus slows down and stops or changes direction approximately once every 7 days. And he concluded that the legend might further be based upon a Sabbath day crossing of the Sabachon coinciding with the current being at rest. This would mean that the 10 tribes had migrated across the straits towards Europe. Unfortunately, John Hulley, like I said, he was a friend of mine. He passed away in 2014 without having published massive amounts of research that he had accumulated and planned to compile into a book, um, uh, furthering his assertion that the 10 tribes migrated across the Bosphorus Straits and into Europe and became some of the European peoples and intermixed with the European peoples. So this is, like I said, this was published in an Orthodox Jewish Chabad journal by an Orthodox Jew. Zarfat is our next handout. We're going to identify um, the place where the scriptures say the lost 10 tribes went, or at least one of the places where the lost 10 tribes went. The Book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 20. By the way, the Book of Obadiah is great material that has to do with the interactions with the lost 10 tribes in the last days and how the house of Israel helps the house of Judah. And we'll talk about that in the future in another video, Elohim willing. The Book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 20. And the captivity of this host of the children of Israel that are among the Canaanites, even unto Zarphat, and the captivity of Jerusalem that is in Sepharad, shall possess the cities of the south. So the house of Judah, it's basically telling us, migrates to Sepharad. Sepharad is Hebrew for Spain, and we do know, in fact, that a major migration of Jews migrated to Spain, and we call these Jews, the descendants of these Jews, Sephardic Jews. The other group it mentions here is the children of Israel, and they migrated to a place called Zarphat. So the question is, where is Zarphat? Zarphat is, believe it or not, just as Sepharad is the Hebrew word for Spain, Zarphat is the Hebrew word for France. In fact, if you were reading a newspaper in Israel today and it referred to France, the word used would be Zarphat. So if you're reading a Hebrew edition of the Jerusalem Post and it said that the prime minister was visiting in Zarphat, in the Hebrew, it would mean that he was visiting France. In fact, Rashi's commentary on Obadiah 120 plainly states, Zarphat is the kingdom of France. Now I'm going to share a bit of my opinion here, my research, and it's material that we'll look at and will unfold more later. But Gauls had migrated from an area just north of the Assyrian Empire across Europe to the area we know today as France. The land we know today as France was, in fact, once known as Gaul. In fact, the name Charles de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle was famously the leader of the French resistance during World War II. De Gaulle, the de Gaulle in his name means of the Gauls or of Gaul. The Gauls were also known as Celts. They migrated across the English Channel into the British Isles, and thus is why the Celts speak a language called Gaelic or Gallic. These Gauls were Galileans, in my opinion, who had been exiled by the Assyrians to the land north of Assyria. And as they passed through the area known as Turkey today, Asia Minor, they created a colony there called Galatia. The Galatia was a settlement or a colony of Gauls. So, from what we know of this migration of these Gauls to France, fits very well with this reference to the fact that the house of Israel migrates to Zarphat, which is France, because this fits very well with the identification of the Gauls as having been originally Galileans or Galileans, i.e. 10 tribes, the lost 10 tribes. Okay, let's turn to the next handout. Look at the next handout, which is titled United Israel World Union. In 1944, a Zionist activist by the name of David Horowitz organized United Israel World Union. He was also a good friend of mine until his death. So how would you possibly have known him? He organized this thing in 1944. Um, David Horowitz lived to a ripe old age of 99 and passed away in 2002. We'll get back to that in a minute. I am jumping ahead. The hallmark of this Jewish organization was Isaiah's words, "My house will become a house of prayer for all peoples, and whosoever will call upon the name of Yahweh will be saved." Horowitz maintained that the lost tribes of Israel had scattered among the nations and, having lost their identity, uh, um, would be a key component. They'd be a key component and a catalyst of masses of Gentiles whom he believed would be drawn to Judaism and join the Jewish people, bringing about a Messianic age. Horowitz continued to lead the organization and proclaimed this message of future reunion of the two houses of Israel until his death at the age of 99 years old in 2002. Like I said, I knew him. We spoke many times on the phone. He was a good friend, and unfortunately, he passed nearly 20 years ago now. This was very much a Jewish organization, and there were many rabbis involved. His consultative board of United Israel World Union included Rabbi David Mauschwitz, Rabbi Samuel Silver, Rabbi Leo Jung, Rabbi Dr. Samuel Lehrer, Rabbi Irving J. Block, and Rabbi A. Allen Brock, and his board of directors included Rabbi Halu M. Paris. I have a folder here of newsletters from the old United Israel World Union before um, David Horowitz passed away. And it's some really interesting material about the 10 tribes that I have kept in this folder from these newsletters for almost 20 years now. So again, very much a Jewish. In fact, let me also say that David Horowitz used this information to lobby the. He went to the United Nations and he would lobby the European nations and America as effectively a nation of Europeans, and he would lobby these people on the premise that they were House of Israel, following the Book of Obadiah and other passages of Scripture, and lobby them to assist Israel and support Israel. And he did a remarkable work of that, and it was remarkably successful. And that was because prophecy was on his side. He was fulfilling the role and prophecy, fulfilling the prophecies of the book of in the book of Obadiah concerning the two houses of Israel. Okay, moving on to our next handout, Brit Israel. Brit Israel is run by Orthodox Israeli Jew Yair Davidi, who proclaims the message to the two houses of Israel and the 10 lost tribes. David lives in Israel, where he runs the organization Brit Yisrael. He's written several books on the topic of the lost tribes and their migrations into Western Europe. In fact, here are some of them. This is my copy, first edition of his book, The Tribes, which is flipped in the video. And Yair published this around 1992 or 93. So that's how long I've been involved in this teaching and in this material in Judaism. And like I said, this is an old first edition, well used, falling apart. He's also published some other books, and back in the old days, Yair and I, being good friends, he would just send me books. I just get them in the mail, didn't order them or anything. So I also got the book Ephraim and the Lost Israelite Identity. These are the three books that really trace the lost Israelite identity. He's got some other books, some I don't even have. He's written a lot of books, and I don't know what order these go in, but that talk about the prophetic place of the lost 10 tribes rather than their migrations. And so there's biblical truth and role to rule, the task of Joseph, and Joseph, the Israelite identity of America. That might actually be, I think that's based upon reverse engineering prophecy. Anyway, great, interesting stuff. I'm not saying I endorse everything that Yair Davidi writes, but there's certainly a lot of really good material. And again, Yair is not is this is rabbinic Judaism. Okay, this is Jewish material, Orthodox Jewish material. So many of these books have a letter in front giving them rabbinic approbation from Rabbi Avram Feld. Um, so not all of the books I don't believe, but many of them have a letter of rabbinic approbation from Rabbi Avram Feld. We're going to find out about Rabbi Avram Feld in our next handout page. Um, but among Yair's books are the tribes. I just showed you. Um, Yair's thoroughly documented research shows that the lost 10 tribes, which had been transplanted to the outskirts of Assyria, came to be known as the Sakians. Um, they were previously known as Yitzakians, or in Aramaic, Isakians. These Sakians are known to have migrated northwest and made their way into Europe and become the Scythians and Saxons. um, Davidi's research has shown that other tribal groups of the lost tribes immigrated in Europe, emerged in Europe under names similar to those of the tribes of Israel, such as Gaelics or Gauls or Galileans, Danes, Dans, Cimmerians, Simeons, Goths or Goths, which is Gad, which is Hebrew, and pronounced in Hebrew God. Um, really good stuff there. And in fact, back in the mid 1990s, I actually, um, we actually, as an organization, gave Britt its first website, which was really just a page, which was a gift to my friend Yair at the time, because the web was really new and we had a website, and so we created a sub page for him for a period of time. Of course, for a very long time, he's had his own website and run that in house. Okay, now I want to talk about Rabbi Schneerson, and he was the last rabbi of the Chabad, um, of the 7 Rebbes of the Chabad movement, and he passed away. I don't have the year in front of me. I probably shouldn't have mentioned it because I didn't have it in my notes, but he's passed away. And the reason I bring him up is because we mentioned Rabbi Avram Feld. Notice there's a lot of rabbis, okay, Orthodox rabbis that are in support of and have been in support of this United Israel movement, is what I call it, United Israel teaching. It's not so much a movement as a teaching in Rabbinic Judaism. This is what I hold to from a Jewish perspective. It's not regurgitated Anglo-Israelism. It's not two-house theology. It dates back long before two-house theology. It's a Jewish theology of the reunion of the two houses of Israel. So some years ago, Avram Feld received a blessing from the Chabad Lubavitch Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And there's actually a picture of it right there. I pasted in a picture so you can see it for yourself. Rabbi Schneerson wished to thank and bless Rabbi Avram Feld in his ministry to Jewish youth. After the Rebbe gave this blessing, Rabbi Feld requested that the Rebbe give him another blessing. Feld explained his belief based on the scriptures and teaching of the sages that many Gentiles are of Israelite descent and that these lost Israelites would one day return to their heritage and to the land of Israel. The Rebbe replied to Avram's request, "Of course they are." And he then blessed Abraham that he should merit to have a good influence on Jews and on Gentiles of Israelite descent in the prophetic process of Geulah, restoration and redemption of Israel. Um, this makes perfect sense, by the way, because remember the 1987 article in Be'or HaTorah was by uh, uh, John Hulley, was in a Chabad journal. So Chabad, at one time at least, the Chabad leadership and Rabbi Schneerson very much understood this reunion of the two houses of Israel and this united Israel theology. So, really, just to summarize, okay, the point of this video is before I get into some other videos in the future where I'll be talking about the lost 10 tribes a lot and talking about the reunion of the two houses of Israel, is to make it very clear that this is a Jewish theology that I'm talking about. It's not, it may have some overlap, but it's not two house theology. It should not be dismissed as two house theology. It's not regurgitated Anglo-Israelism. It shouldn't be dismissed as Anglo-Israelism. Uh, uh, this is um, Jewish theology based on Jewish sources and the scriptures, and we'll be talking more about what the scriptures say about these things later. But the emphasis I want to make right now is that United Israel theology is a Jewish theology that exists within Rabbinic Judaism and which I hold to and I believe has an important place in Nazarene and the restoration of Nazarene Judaism because Nazarene means branches. We're branches of the olive tree, and it's very clear we have we are the fulfillment of prophecies about the branches and the olive trees, and the natural branches being grafted into their own olive tree. But intricate with that is that wild branches from the house of Ephraim are grafted into that olive tree as well. All of this in fulfillment of Ezekiel 37, where the two sticks are joined together, and sticks in Hebrew is etz, which also means just wood or lumber, or tree. It also means tree. So the two trees are the two sticks, and all of this fits together prophetically. And so we're going to be talking about Ezekiel 37 in the future, and we're going to be talking about a lot of things related to. We're going to do a thread of videos that are going to address this issue of the lost 10 tribes and the reunion of the two houses of Israel. So look for more on this in the future. And this, like I said, this video was simply to establish the foundation that this is a Jewish theology with a history in Judaism, in normative rabbinic Judaism, and we find it in all the way back to 1944 in the United Israel World Union, um, uh, and in several Jewish writers, as we've pointed out, um, have talked about this, and it's also can be found in the rabbinic sources. Even Rashi on Obadiah 120 identifies Zarfat, where the 10 tribes, to which the 10 tribes migrate and settle for a period of time anyway, as France outright. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close here, and I hope that this has given you some new information maybe you didn't already have, and helped you understand this issue of the lost 10 tribes. And like I said, it's really an introductory video because it's important to understand that this is a Jewish theology of United Israel theology we're talking about, not to be dismissed as two-house theology or lumped together with two-house theology or lumped together with Anglo-Israelism. This is a purely Jewish theology in a Jewish context, and that's the way that I will be teaching it now and in the future. All right, so for now, may the Lord bless and keep you. May he shine his face upon you and grant you peace. Shalom.